The presenter of our main talk today is an out-of-town guest, but she is no stranger to Houston Oasis. Less than 2 years ago, she took the Oasis core values and the Oasis concept of secular community and successfully transplanted that to Kansas City and launched the amazing, thriving secular community Kansas City Oasis, which is our sister community, the same logo, same core values, wonderful bunch of people up there. If you went there each week, it would feel much like it feels here in terms of the kind of people and the vibe and everything else. It's great to have the executive director of Kansas City Oasis back with us. Please give a warm welcome to Houston to Helen Stringer.
All right, we're talking about Scientology today, right? It's a Scientology meeting. You're in the wrong place. Anyone actually see this movie? There was a recent documentary, HBO put it out, or this book is actually really excellent. It's huge, but a very excellent book. Having read it, I was really excited when the HBO documentary came out. I wanted to put some names and faces together in stories. One story that really stood out to me was about an individual named Spanky Taylor. That is her name. It is awkward for me to say the word Spanky like 6 times in a paragraph, but I can do this. But her story is really just wild. Like all church employees, she signed one of those billion-year contracts. That's a commitment, right? Pledged her life to the cause. She was, according to her own account, brainwashed, programmed, and forbidden to leave the property. When she gave birth, her baby was promptly taken away because they didn't want it to interfere with her church work. One day, she went to visit her daughter. The baby was malnourished, utterly neglected, and her eyes were fused shut with pus. Finally, the light flipped in her head, and she, with the help of a friend, was able to escape and never looked back. Her story is in this documentary. Now, after hearing stories like this, I often think, that is crazy. How would anyone fall for that? I mean, really, when it comes to such torture and such extreme things, how do people fall into those traps? And then it strikes me. I, too, have held beliefs that maybe not quite that extreme, but could fall under the same camp. Recalling a time where I once thought my house was haunted, or, as we actually thought, had a demonic stronghold, reminds me that I, too, should actually check my arrogance at the door, because I, too, am human and can fall into similar mind traps. So in 2003, my husband and I became the proud owners of our first home. It was 2.5 wooded acres, 1 year old, and just right outside of Nashville. We were through the roof thrilled. Well, it was a dream until literally about a month in. My husband and I were having a discussion about something religious. Our discussions about religion is what definitely walked us out of it eventually. But at this time, we were just discussing something apologetic related. Don't remember what the subject was. But I remember distinctly suddenly feeling this really cold rush come through the room. And then this sense of dread kind of overtook me as well. You know that kind of sixth sense feeling you get that something's just not right? Well, it was just that. So I told my husband, I'm like, did you notice something too? And he's like, yeah, cold rush of air. I felt it too. It just, something doesn't feel right. So we started to totally freak ourselves out. Now, being the good Christians that we were at that time, we immediately jumped to thinking that maybe a demonic presence was in our new house. Or, for you non-religious folk, ghosts. Coming out of a charismatic Christian denomination, such a notion is not uncommon. It is thought that demons still roam our world in a continuing battle of good and evil, or so we theorized at this point in our religious journey. So we sat there and began to seriously freak out. So, what does the Bible tell you to do, or rather, what do religious authorities tell you to do when you are facing the epic battle of humans against evil and demons in rural Tennessee? What are you supposed to do? You pray! Come on, guys. Come on. actually. Ironically enough, praying together with my husband and I, it always seemed really awkward, and maybe it's because you're talking to yourself with each other, and so it's just slightly awkward. But we went ahead and sat together and started praying and denouncing the demons. This is what you do in case you need to know. This is your handbook. Denouncing the demons that may be in our home and commanding them to leave. Then we started to hear strange noises. Sudden sounds that made us think that maybe the demons were trying to make their presence known, or maybe our prayers were working. They were getting really upset about it. Larry told me, my husband, that he heard growling sounds. But I, on the other hand, heard indiscernible whispers. We went to bed that night, terrified, with the assistance of Benadryl, because we had totally psyched ourselves out. In the days that followed, what we observed more strange occurrences. Cabinet doors just being left wide open. Our dog, her name is Hottie, would start barking at the same corner out of nowhere, something that she hadn't done in our previous apartment. The lights would flicker off and on. A shelf in one of our back bedrooms just suddenly collapsed. And that same ominous feeling remained. I even had this dream where kind of this vision of this really big dark angel that was just like hovering over our house, like a symbol of darkness. This led us to wonder what maybe caused this presence at our house. We postulated that the house was maybe built on a burial ground. This is all for real. This is what's sad. I will redeem myself later. You're like, oh my gosh, we're gonna let her do this in another city. Okay, I will redeem myself. I think. We also thought maybe a civil war was fought there. This is rural Tennessee. Or maybe Indians died there, like poltergeist. So, not wanting anyone to think we were crazy, imagine that, now I tell you publicly, we actually kept this pretty secret. We went ahead, though, out of complete desperation, reached out to our pastor, the church we had been attending in Nashville. Now, of course, we told them, and they also looked at us like we were smoking something. But they did the right thing, and they prayed with us. And then they referred us on to a couple who was experienced in prison ministry. And they told us that they had the gifts of discerning of spirits and the gift of spiritual warfare. Now, if you don't know, God gives out gifts. And these are part of the options. And these gifts, there's other gifts like the gift of prophecy, gift of knowledge, that should make you one chuckle, and the gift of spiritual warfare. I would rather not have some of those gifts. But we contacted them because we were literally desperate. And they set up to make a 3-hour trip to our house. I recall the hours leading up to that visit and thinking this was like something straight out of a movie. So, they arrived in a beat-up old van. And upon arrival, they told us that they saw demons running around in our yard. It's a really great way to keep freaking us out. Then they told us that the next step to start the process of getting the demons to leave was to turn the lights out, because you have to have the lights out to be able to see them. I'm thinking I don't want to see them. That's the last thing that I'm interested in. Some of the logic with all this, it's just sad. Okay, they then instructed us to go room by room and demand the demons to leave. Now, of course, the man led the way, because God works better through people who have a penis. So he led the way, and he began in our 2 spare bedrooms and began to fiercely demand that, in the name of Jesus, I command you to leave this house. And then he went into speaking in tongues, which, if you don't know what tongues are, it's God's special prayer language for when you don't know what to pray. He gives you like some other language of wonder, so that he could talk to himself. So he started speaking in tongues, also had anointing oil. He placed anointing oil on every single doorway that was in our house. And he literally addressed every corner of both rooms with great fervor. I mean, he's like screaming at the walls, commanding that they leave our house. But as we left our second bedroom, I recall just turning around to look back for a second, and I felt like I got struck in the chest. It literally almost knocked the wind out of me. And I voiced this to our spiritual warrior friend, and he told me that a demon had just tried to possess me. I'm like, oh my God. But it's okay because you have Jesus in your heart. So he probably wasn't successful, so it was like a hit, and then they didn't get in. So that was okay. He also went through our house and prayed into every corner, every bathroom, literally closets. I mean, where you store like your linens and stuff. He was thorough. And he even prayed into, because our kitchen cabinets, I told him, had been left open, he opened every single one of our kitchen cabinets and demanded the demons to leave those cabinets too. He ended the night by heading into our woods to address the demons there as well. And I can only imagine what our neighbors, fortunately we had some acreage, but you could see through, especially when it was winter. I don't know what, our neighbors probably were like, wow, we'll stay away from that house. That couple left that night telling us that we were probably going to have to do this ritual often, because it's possible that the house had built on something desecrated, whatever that means. Nothing like a really wonderful parting gift of dread. They even called us a few days later to tell us that some of the demons from our house had gotten into their van, which forced them to have to stop on the side of the road with their long drive home and command those demons to get out of their van. I told them, you're welcome. What eventually transpired was, over a very long span of time, the lessening of feeling like our house was just that haunted. Even after that night, we still thought we experienced random spiritual, supernatural phenomena. Now, in a strange way, I came to accept that our house was probably just had some issues, and the fear and concern slightly lessened over time. And I will say I have never experienced anything like that since then. Now, being on this side of the religious spectrum, I'm now an unbeliever. I was a Christian then, obviously. I was a really good Christian. That demon I'd be screwed at this point with that demon. Now, being on this side of the religious spectrum, I can easily explain what we experienced in that house. So, as I redeem myself, first, our minds are incredibly powerful and easily taken over by the power of suggestion and confirmation bias. During this time in our lives, we were both studying the problem of evil, which was one of the main reasons that got us out of it, couldn't rectify it. One of the books that we had been studying was Greg Boyd's book, Satan and the Problem of Evil. This is part of the cover. This cover, so this is the full art picture, and this is actually what he has on the cover. So it's this depiction of heaven and hell. And this cover image, actually still to this day, is kind of what I tend to picture when you talk about hell. I don't know why. It became like the default image in my head. It's no wonder we thought our house was haunted, because we were really delving deep into studying evil. And, Greg Boyd is really big on this warfare theodicy that literally, that we are in this epic battle between good and evil here on earth, and that's why bad things happen. Or at least that was his last attempt at trying to explain the problem of evil. Also, confirmation bias was totally at play. Confirmation bias, if you don't know, is a tendency to confirm our existing beliefs. So if I think there are demons in the world, I'm going to naturally seek ways to confirm that belief. And in this instance, it just snowballed out of control. I can also explain the phenomena that we were experiencing as demonic presence. Those cabinet doors being left wide open, well, I tend to leave cabinet doors wide open. It's the strangest thing, and I still catch myself doing it to this day, where I look back and I just don't shut them. I don't know why, but I've never noticed. This was our first house, so maybe my parents just always knew to shut them after me, but I'm pretty sure I left those doors wide open. It's me. Our dog, Hottie, barking at that corner. Dogs are weird. They have strong senses of hearing, and she's an interesting dog as it is. And honestly, when you think about it, what in the world does Satan minions care about my cute little pug? I mean, really? Or she was possessed herself. That was the other option. She didn't have Jesus in her heart. Still to this day, day, she's really old now, she'll sit in our front yard and just like bark randomly at the air. I mean, so the dog's not a good proof of anything. The lights flickering, I attribute that to faulty wiring. That house was the first house that our builder had ever built in residential. Sign me up. Even like our electrical outlets were upside down because he had done more commercial work than residential. But I'm assuming that it was probably thrown together really quickly like a lot of new home builds are, and it was simply faulty wiring. That shelf that fell in our back bedroom, that's called physics. When you put too much weight on a shelf that's not designed to bear that load, it's probably going to collapse. The sounds of groaning or whispers. Our minds, like I said, are really great at running with suggestions. And I don't know if you know, Benadryl actually also causes auditory hallucinations. So we've been taking that to try and get ourselves to sleep, so I'm sure it didn't help. But also, this is my layman opinion, our mind fabricated those sounds. And what I find interesting today is, in retrospect, my husband heard a totally different sound, probably what in his mind you would think demons might sound like. And in my head, it was something totally different. So you'd think we would have heard the same thing and been like, oh, there's a disconnect there. But we didn't. So I think our minds completely fabricated what we thought we were hearing. And like I said, seriously, I've never heard any such things. I don't think I'm schizophrenic, but debate's out. Lastly, when we came to our house, when they came to our house to get rid of the demons, our spiritual warrior friends, I felt that hit in the chest. I now figure that was probably just the result of sheer stress. Who knows, my heart could have skipped a beat. I could have had an adrenaline rush with a crazy physiological response. When you're under extreme stress, your body responds in really strange ways. Now, many of us here, and also well-respected philosophers and economists and social scientists, sometimes assume that human beings are rational agents. However, Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel laureate and professor of psychology at Princeton, has now demonstrated that we're not nearly as rational as we'd like to think. Jonah Lehrer, who wrote in a New Yorker article called "Smart People Are Stupid," he wrote, "When people face an uncertain situation, they don't carefully evaluate the information or look up relevant statistics. Instead, their decisions depend on a long list of mental shortcuts, which often lead them to make foolish decisions." He also shares that in a study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, that in many instances, this will be rough for you guys, smarter people may be more vulnerable to these thinking errors. Although we assume that, I know, right? You guys are like, I know you guys are a smart crowd. We assume that intelligence is like this buffer against bias, but actually can be a subtle curse. Contrary to what we may think, self-awareness is not always particularly helpful. A scientist noted, this is quote, "People who were aware of their own biases were not better able to overcome them." Kahneman, who admits in Thinking Fast and Slow, that his decades of groundbreaking research have failed to significantly improve his own mental performance. He stated, quote, "My intuitive thinking is just as prone to overconfidence, extreme predictions, and the planning fallacy as it was before I had made a study of these issues." Lehrer also shared that one of our most dangerous bias is that we naturally assume that everyone else is more susceptible to thinking errors, a tendency known as the bias blind spot. We excel really well at noticing the flaws of the other, like with Scientology. And in turn, we are unable to spot those same mistakes in ourselves. Lehrer wrote, "Although the bias blind spot itself is not a new concept, research demonstrates that it applies to every single bias under consideration. In each instance, we readily forgive our own minds, but look harshly upon the minds of others." So why do I share this? Well, it's become a subtle reminder, at least to myself, to be humble. We are all human. We are all susceptible to fallacies and biased thinking. There isn't a single person in this room who can exclude themselves from this reality. We all come from different backgrounds and experiences. As a community of compassion, we must balance the expectations expectation that our lack of religious belief or practice makes us a better form of human, because it doesn't. What makes us really great people is our humanism, or our compassion and our empathy for one another. We can't treat others as lesser human beings because they do religion. That's not compassionate or caring or an expression of humanism. All we can do is what I assume many of us are already aiming for, to do what's best with the cards we've been dealt, to lean on the scientific method to filter our biases as best as possible, to make as many moments count, to help leave the world a better place than when we found it. A dose of humility and understanding can go a long way towards reaching that goal.